The new NAFTA was on track to ratification in all three countries, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. But last night, an unexpected move from President Donald Trump. And now, the fate of the new NAFTA is once again up in the air. Trump announced that he would impose tariffs on all goods coming from Mexico beginning June 10th, unless Mexico does more to stem the flow of migrants crossing the border. The tariffs, he says, will start at 5% and rise steadily to 25% by October. We have some breaking news just in. We received a readout from the Prime Minister's office of a conversation that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had that involved the topic of NAFTA with President Donald Trump. That readout just arrived in our inbox, so I'm going to read a little bit of it to you. The Prime Minister, the readout says, conveyed his thanks for the productive visit to Ottawa by Vice President Mike Pence, which reinforced, quote unquote, the strong ties between Canada and the United States. The two leaders also discussed relations with China, including the strong support of the U.S. for the release of the two Canadians arbitrarily detained in China. Yesterday, Mike Pence made specific mention of that in the press conference with Justin Trudeau. The readout from the Prime Minister's office goes on to say the two leaders reiterated their commitment to the new North American Free Trade Agreement and welcome progress towards its ratification. They also discussed the Toronto Raptors' victory over the Golden State Warriors. Go Raps. The Prime Minister and President agreed to keep in close touch and look forward to seeing each other at the upcoming G20 summit in Japan. So that is the readout that just arrived in our mailbox of a conversation that took place between Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump. I will say there is no specific mention of the threat in this. NAFTA in general was discussed. There is no specific mention, though, of the tariffs that Donald Trump is now threatening to lay on Mexico. So what is the Mexican viewpoint on all of this? Earlier, I spoke with Mexico's ambassador to Canada, Juan Jose Gomez Gamacho.
Pleasure to be here again.
Nice to see you 2 days in a row. It's rare for us to have someone back, but lots happened since we had you on yesterday. Just a few hours after the announcement essentially was made that tariffs would be levied on Mexico by the United States, on Mexican products by the United States. Were you, I mean, the tone of our conversation yesterday was very optimistic. Were you surprised?
Well, absolutely. A surprise, no question. It was unexpected. I have to say, nevertheless, we are not overreacting. Let's see what happens. These tariffs have not been imposed yet. Our foreign minister is traveling together with a team to Washington right now to have talks with Americans and to see where to go and how to address all these challenges.
Do you know who your foreign minister will be meeting with?
Not yet. He's going to the White House.
He's going to the White House. Let me ask you about the potential impact on NAFTA. Is there at all any plans to change? I know you had said yesterday that there was a process that was beginning. It could be done in a few weeks. Will anything change?
We keep going. Yesterday, as I mentioned to you yesterday, later, after we talked, the President sent to the Senate NAFTA to be approved. The Senate reacted immediately, informing that it was already in the agenda of an extraordinary session, and it will be considered 18th of June, 18th or 19th, and we have not changed that at all.
So even if those tariffs are actually, the day that he's saying is June 10th, even if those tariffs actually come into place, you'll still proceed with ratification?
It's still too soon to say that they will.
Okay, so you don't know. It's undetermined at this point, depending on what goes down.
Yes, and again, we are talking. That's the way it should be. Our minister is flying, so let's see.
You sound kind of optimistic that there might be some kind of solution arrived at. What drives that optimism, given, I guess, the domestic politics that are at play in the United States too, and the sort of force with which the president comes out and talks about this issue in particular?
Well, first, because it's something that doesn't help neither the U.S. nor Mexico. We believe that both our friends in the U.S. and indeed in the government of the U.S. will see that this really doesn't address any problem. It only would create others, but doesn't address the issue that concerns President Trump, which is migration. And on migration, we have, yes, a big challenge, which is that Mexico is receiving hundreds of thousands of migrants, but I have to say that we've been the largest migration corridor in the world for many years, and this is because of the enormous magnet that the US generates. So many people want to go there, and we are in between. But we are at the same time doing the heavy lifting on this. We are doing our best to stop these flows, always with the condition to ensure that it's done with a humanitarian way, protecting their human rights. But we are really doing our work. So what we need, instead of being just pressured by the US, we need rather the US working with us, as in fact has happened, to make sure that we can address this. The only way we can really address the issue of migration, in addition to strengthening our cooperation in the border, is by working in addressing the development challenges that Central America has. And 2 weeks ago, precisely because of this, President López Obrador launched a major plan, development plan for Central America, and we've been talking to the US and with Canada, by the way, to make sure that these two countries, the US in this case, join us in really pouring a robust effort into those three countries as a way, and as the only way, to really stop migration.
You've been talking to Canada about that as well?
Yes.
And what would Canada's role be, do you think?
Very optimistic and very keen to participate.
They are waiting.
They are waiting. Well, the development program that we are launching is both a typical development effort in the sense of cooperation, but also in bringing the private sector, for example, developing infrastructure that Central America so much needs. And infrastructure needs business. It has to be a good investment, and we would love to see Canada joining. And this is what we have been discussing with government and companies. I hope in very near future to come to the government to present a very clear plan as it has been announced. But we want the US participating there. That's really the only way you can stop these migration flows. People are moving because they are fleeing something. And this something is violence, is poverty, is lack of employment, is lack of opportunities. So they are going north to Mexico and then aspiring to the US in search of a better life. They are not bad people. They are really very good people. But it's true that the numbers are important. So we are doing there everything we can to stop it.
Do you have any expectations of the Canadian government where this latest threat from President Trump is concerned?
As Minister Freeland just said a few minutes ago, first, and it's totally correct, we are always in constant contact, communicating, exchanging views, informing each other. And second, at the same time, this is a border issue between Mexico and the US, and that's how we are addressing it.
So you're okay with the view from her that it's a bilateral issue?
Yes, I mean, it's a bilateral issue within a trilateral context, if you like, but this is a real issue that we need to address bilaterally.
And what do you mean by constant contact? Who is in constant contact?
Minister Freeland, our foreign minister, our trade minister, our NAFTA negotiator, always WhatsApp, phones. It's really a fluid conversation, let's say, that they have, and me here with my counterparts in Canada. So the fluidity of the dialogue is constant.
I just want to be clear that there's no expectation on Canada that, for example, it holds up ratification of NAFTA if this trade dispute
Not at all.
increases.
We are even ourselves are going on.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Ambassador. Appreciate your time today.
Great pleasure.
We are, of course, aware of the border issue that Mexico and the United States are currently discussing. This is a bilateral issue. Of course, we are partners in a trilateral trade agreement, and that is an important North American partnership, but each country also does have bilateral issues.
Just when you thought things with NAFTA were headed to calmer waters, a new storm. A mere 2 hours after Vice President Mike Pence discussed speedy ratification of the new NAFTA with Prime Minister Trudeau here in Ottawa, President Trump threatened new tariffs against Mexico, potentially derailing the trade deal. Canada says it will proceed with its new NAFTA implementation bill, but is that a good idea? Derek Burney is a former Canadian ambassador to the U.S. He's currently a senior strategic advisor with Norton Rose Fulbright, and he joins us now. Hello, Mr. Burney.
Hello,
nice to see you
nice
again.
to see you.
Pleasure to have you. So yesterday seemed like a good news day, and before Mike Pence had even taken off back to Washington, the news arrives that there's a threat of new tariffs against Mexico. Your reaction?
Well, yes, I thought, we were safe from the pyrotechnics yesterday because we didn't have the president. We had the vice president, and things seemed to be going reasonably smoothly. And then bang-o, we get this threat of tariffs. Well, I think it's unfortunate news because it's very destabilizing, not just on the prospects for the ratification of the new NAFTA, but in terms of trade generally. The Americans keep lunging like this, slapping tariffs on, which are a violation of international law, a violation of the existing NAFTA. Where's it going to stop? Because, I think the Mexicans are scrambling to try to calm the waters a bit in the hope that this will not happen. But just the mere threat of it is destabilizing. It's certainly not going to make the ratification of the agreement in Washington easier, and it was already going to be difficult. I think, unfortunately, we have a president who's very frustrated by other things, and he's lashing out, as he tends to do, in all directions. And let's hope that calmer waters will prevail.
That's what I wanted to ask you when you mentioned NAFTA. What do you think the potential impact on, that was the big subject yesterday, was the ratification of NAFTA. It looks like it's going ahead here. We had the Mexican ambassador on who says it could happen within weeks there. That was prior to the announcement. And obviously you mentioned the constraints already, or the opposition among Democrats in the United States. What do you think this overall means for the ratification of that deal?
Well, I think we have to see it as a setback because we were already in difficulty because the Democrats have reservations about the agreement. Those are probably reconcilable. But, what's going on domestically in Washington right now, given the Mueller expose this week, is a good word, I guess, diplomatically I can put on it. I think it's increasingly evident to me that the Democrats don't want to give this president a victory on anything before the election in 2020. Whether it leads to impeachment or censure or whatever, it doesn't matter. The mood is not exactly receptive to compromise or accommodation. So I think we're already facing an uphill battle to get it ratified by Congress. This doesn't make it any better. It makes it a lot worse because I think there's going to even be a division within the administration on this tactic of the president.
Sounds
that
like there
would be
already
my view. Is that
apparently,
right?
I think it's the Post reporting that Robert Lighthizer is not in favor of those.
Well, and what if you're the Mexican negotiator? How do you feel? At least he's not North Korean.
What about Canada's position in all of this? So Minister Freeland came out today and said, this is essentially a border issue to a degree, and therefore a bilateral one. Is that the right approach?
Well, I don't think we have a choice but to hunker down and proceed with our own ratification. We got what we wanted, which was a lifting of the aluminum and steel tariffs, although there's still a few hooks in that agreement, as you probably know, Vashi. But I do think the government is doing the right thing by moving ahead with ratification. With the original NAFTA, the Americans were about a year late getting it ratified. I remember that. The negotiation ended in '92 and the agreement didn't get ratified until '94. So, this is not new. We just have to be patient. We don't want to react to the tweets. We've been saying that all along, right? I think that should continue to be our view. To just let the Mexicans do what they need to do in Washington, support them as we can, because you're right, this has got nothing to do with the trade agreement. It's got to do with the immigration issue, very separate issue.
I want to ask you about China as well. Obviously, another big issue for Canada came up during the press conference with Mike Pence. What did you think of what you heard from the Vice President on the U.S.'s stance on the issues that Canada is facing right now?
Well, I was encouraged by the fact that he hinted that the President would raise it with the President of China at the G20 meeting later this summer, I guess it is, in Japan. It's evident that we don't have much in the way of access of our own with the Chinese. So I think if the American president does raise the concern that we have about not only the incarceration of our Canadians, but the manner in which they're being incarcerated compared to the luxury with which the Huawei executive is being held under home arrest in Vancouver. I think that's about the most important thing that came out yesterday. I still hope that our own government will come up with an initiative to register its concern in a more effective manner than we have thus far.
What might that look like?
Well, I think it could be a high-level delegation of some kind. I know they haven't responded to the calls from the foreign minister, so it can't be probably somebody who's in the government right now. But I think there are people who've had experience with China, who are no longer politically active, that might be amenable to making overtures to some of their friends in Beijing, who are not necessarily in power, but still in a position to have some influence. That would be one thing that we could think about. And we should look very hard at what this extradition process itself, what path is it on? Is there a way it can be accelerated? I mean, we're in the worst position of all. We're getting caught between a rock and a hard place on extradition, and we're getting caught between a rock and a hard place on how we deal with Huawei. I don't envy the people who are trying to make those decisions. There are no easy answers.
What would you do on Huawei? And I ask because we heard, for example, Mr. Pence sort of issue a warning yesterday. Not a surprising one. We've heard it from the administration many times before. But at the same time, then China responded. I think one of their spokespeople this morning saying that Canada should, using the word, there would be consequences if Canada heeded that warning.
Another threat, as they declared their unending commitment to multilateralism. We thought it was interesting that it was a kind of a 1-2 punch. We're all in favor of multilateralism, but we can also hammer at will. Anyway, beside that, look, I think the only prospect for hope on the Huawei mess is in the context of the U.S.-China trade negotiations. If they can find an accommodation on the major trade issues between them, and in some way the Huawei issue can be finessed, that would be a reasonable way to deal with it. We should not take a snap decision on this. We don't want to make matters worse for the Canadians that are incarcerated totally on dubious charges. So I think we should take the Prime Minister said correctly, it's being looked at by our national security and our other experts. I think that that study should continue for some time until we see what happens in the U.S.-China negotiations.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Burney.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Good to be with you.
We've been giving them advance warning for months. We've asked them repeatedly and told them they have to do more. We're asking Mexico to enforce their own laws to help stop the people coming in from Central America. We've seen a massive influx of people coming from that region, and they have certainly the ability and the legal authority in which to deal with it, and we're simply asking them to do that.
Turning back to our top story now, the new NAFTA was on track to ratification in all three countries, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. But last night, an unexpected move from U.S. President Donald Trump. And now the fate of the new North American trade pact is once again up in the air. Trump announced that he would impose tariffs on all goods coming from Mexico beginning June 10th, unless Mexico does more to stem the flow of migrants crossing the border. The tariffs will begin at 5% and rise steadily to 25% by October. So could this totally unravel months of negotiations? Bruce Heyman is the former U.S. ambassador to Canada. He joins me now in studio. Hello, Mr. Heyman. Nice to see you.
How are you?
Great to have you here in person. Let me ask you first what you think, whether there will be a potential impact on NAFTA of this latest threat from the president regarding tariffs on Mexico.
So first of all, I hope not. I mean, the president doing this is such a hostile act toward Mexico, but he uses tariffs as a tool of weapon of choice. You saw it up here with steel and aluminum tariffs. He's doing it around the world. And, I think this latest action took everybody by surprise, very hostile. I think the bigger issue continues to be that the Congress has said all along, Speaker Pelosi and team have said all along, they'd like to see enforcement provisions put in USMCA to hold up the labor and environmental standards that the Prime Minister talked about, being very proud of having, the ability to have those put in the agreement. So, I still think there's a path to getting this done. It continues to get diminished by the president's actions, though.
Okay, let's take away what happened with Mexico and just focus on the opposition from Democratic leadership that we've heard, the concerns that they've expressed. How much, what realistically do you think a timeline for ratification is given those concerns?
So you have kind of two small windows right now. The president's team has put in notification to begin the process of TPA yesterday, which I don't think was really well received by the Democrats. And so if they continue to just say, this is it, we're not making any changes, take it or leave it, I think the chance of ratification is quite small during this congressional period. I would say that if, though, and Ambassador Lighthizer has had constructive conversations with Democratic leadership, if we can continue to keep that alive, and that language is modified such that we can get comfortable with enforcement provisions being put in, then I think this has a chance. I would say base case has now moved to, based on the behaviors the last 24 hours, both the tariffs on Mexico and this notification to Congress. My base case now is this will have to get passed after the 2020 presidential election.
Really, that far out, you think?
Yeah, because nobody is going to vote on this during the year 2020 up until a presidential. This is the hardest vote in Congress, I think, is a trade piece of legislation. That and health care and, and immigration. But this has historically been a very tough vote.
You know a lot of the Democrats, of course, who have been expressing some concerns around this. You mentioned the Prime Minister's comments yesterday. They were aimed primarily at those Democrats.
Right.
And essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but he was saying, hey, we're alike, right? Our party is similar to yours. We had those concerns around progressive items. We put them in there.
Right.
You should recognize that.
I think they do.
Do you think that, but is it that they don't think they go far enough? Or
No, they're just not enforced. So
you just think it's the enforcement
If you
item.
said that, everybody has to stop at red lights, and we agree the red lights should be where they are, and we're all comfortable with that. But if you went through, everybody drove through them, and you had no ability to penalize people or tell people, no, you can't be going through the red lights. The red lights are there for a reason. The environmental and labor standards are there for a reason. And you've never heard Democrats say we don't like them. What you've heard them say is we want to make sure they're enforced. And so I don't think there should be any problem with that. I mean, it's not like we don't like the way the whole agreement is. We don't like some of the things that there's some conversation on drug, biologics and patent life. Again, shouldn't be a problem for Canada if they agree to shorten those. But the reality is it's just about enforcing the provisions that the Prime Minister talked about.
So they're not looking for extra provisions. And on the same vein,
at this point, they haven't seen the written agreement. So we don't know, what's the secret in the sauce. I would say at this point, the Speaker has been very consistent. She continues to say, yeah, but we want to make sure that this is good for American workers, it's good for American farmers, it's good for the environment. To be good means you have to hold those labor and environmental standards up.
Do you think that, based on what you've heard so far, and I take your point that the full text hasn't been read, but that it would be possible to amend or add to that agreement instead of reopening the whole thing? Do you think it needs to be a big negotiation again, or can it be done after Canada ratifies the deal?
It strikes me that there should be a way to reach with all three parties an agreement on how to hold people accountable for the agreement that they've just made. And that we're not asking them to reconsider, whole aspects of how this agreement was developed. We're just saying, if you have an agreement, let's hold yourself to the standards. I think the President's actions over the last 24 hours demonstrate why you need to have accountability and enforceability of agreements. The President is taking advantage of prior agreements that Congress has given to him. And I think that there's going to be revisiting of the authorities that have been given to a president. I think everybody's looking at agreements now through a different lens. And they want to make sure.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so over time, Congress has given authorities to the President on the basis of national emergencies, national security, all of these things. The President has weaponized that and has said, Canada's not a threat to national security, but he used that as a basis to putting on a tax of steel and aluminum. So he then declares a national emergency to build a wall. He's now using a different national emergency provision to put tariffs on Mexico. And so
his supporters would say that he's just using the tools available to him.
No, and I don't disagree with that. But those tools, they have overreach. I don't think that the Congress ever intended that the President use the tools in the way he's used them.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Heyman.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
your insight today.
Pleasure.
Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.